Hey everybody, DJ here, and this is another part of the crash course for ProRender. This is going to be covering the material library, and this will be for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to like and subscribe. We also have a Patreon, Discord, and a whole bunch of other social media sites, so go ahead and take a look at the info section about this YouTube channel for more information on that. So first, we're not going to go into Blender today. We're going to go online, and you're going to go onto the AMD website. If you take a look at the original video for the download instructions for this particular series, I told you that while you're there, you might want to also grab this material library here while you're at it and get that installed. So for those of you who didn't do it, I'll put the link to this page in the video description below, but you'll want to go ahead and download that material library. And once it's downloaded, you can see right here that it's just basically an installer. So whatever your system is, go ahead and double click that. And I'm going to do this with you guys just so that we can see that everything works fine. So it's basically going to do a full installation, which means that if you ever need to get rid of it, you can uninstall it rather easy. So go ahead, install that after you download it. It might take a couple minutes because there are a lot of materials in there. And then finish that up. And if we then jump into Blender, and what we're going to do is I'm actually going to open up this scene here that we had before with the glass and the other materials that we've been doing because we'd like to see this on multiple things. So basically, if it worked correctly, you should see over here, if you go to your materials properties, over here on the right, you should see a new little drop down called Material Library Browser. And here you're going to have a whole bunch of materials. Just really quick for those of you who find that you are not seeing your materials library or you have an older version of Radeon ProRender and the materials library is not showing up, what you want to do is you'll want to go into, and this is on Windows, so whatever you're using, whether it's Linux or Mac, you'll have to do it your way. Go in, you'll have to actually find the ProRender material library, so right here, and uninstall that, and then reinstall the new material library add-on that you download from the website. So again, if you're basically using an old version of ProRender, you've updated to a new version of ProRender, whether it's a beta or the official release, and you're seeing that the materials library is not working, you'll want to uninstall your old material library and then reinstall the new one from the website. So before we really add anything, let's kind of kick things off and get it started with the rendering engine. And what I always like to do when I open up a ProRender scene is I just like to set up the rendered view just to get everything working correctly. Sometimes it will purge some of the data on your computer and you'll have to wait a minute or so for it to load in all the kernels and everything, but there we go. And this is the nice 2.0 renderer, so full setting here. And again, if you're kind of lost already, you should probably take a look at my previous tutorial videos. I'll put in a card right here so you can jump to the downloaded installation. But basically, this is pretty straightforward, but I wanted to do this one before I went into the PBR textures tutorial because this will at least give you a nice starting point in looking at PBR materials or materials in general when using this program, because there's a couple things you really should know about before you get started. So the first thing that I want to sort of like let you know about in this particular engine before we actually put on a material is that the way that this engine works, it kind of expects you to have an object UV unwrapped. Now, you and I started using Blender probably with procedural nodes using the object data, and I'll kind of pull. Let's just take a look at this ground material here really quick. So you probably started off with not that. With a texture coordinate, we'll actually just click or hit Control T here, which will actually, if you have Node Wrangler installed, it will bring this up. You're probably used to taking the object data, piping it into the mapping node, and then for the image texture, you'll pick your image. So let's just choose something here. So I'll just pick something. It doesn't really matter. And you'll probably be used to hitting this box here, and it kind of like will procedurally put on a texture for you. Cycles and Eevee works that way, but that's not how ProRender works. So you are kind of expected to know how to use UV unwraps and do your procedural texturing using the UV unwrap. There are a couple ways to do some procedural stuff, which really, in my opinion, is not great, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. So for me, and for this tutorial series, I'm actually going to bypass some of that. I'll talk about it in the next tutorial when we talk about the PBR materials, but procedural texturing is just not quite there for this engine right now. And once it does get there, I will send out a video kind of explaining how it works. There's a couple workarounds that you can do, and some of them do work, but it's really kind of difficult, and I don't think it's worth it. So, what we're going to do instead is I'm just going to explain to you how some of this really works. And over here, I'm actually going to go to this view so we don't accidentally crash our viewer here. So I'm going to go ahead and select Suzanne, and we're going to go into the UV editing tab here. And this is what I mean by UV unwrapped. So your object has to be unwrapped in a way that the material, the texture, can actually be put over the top here. And if we take, let's say, this normal map, I know that might be a little bit hard for you to see here, but if we look at all of these, you can see that there's an image behind it, and then the coordinates here are mapped to the 2D plane so that an image material or something like that can be put on here. And basically what happens is when you create a character or an object or anything like that, usually you will texture this either using a procedural generated or painted way. So something like this Substance Painter, which is a Adobe product, so it costs money to use this kind of thing, but it works pretty well. Or you'll have painted your object here in cycles or something like that. So the idea here is that this is a render engine. It's not necessarily a like painting and texturing engine. So the expectation, as far as I can tell for this engine, is that you should have materials kind of already thought out and baked out, or whatever it is that you've done to create your object, and you're kind of using this engine to do your final rendering. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do some texturing and all that, which I'm going to show you in a minute, but it what it means is that you need to have your objects sort of unwrapped in this way. So if we look at the LuxCore ball here, you can see that it's unwrapped in a spherical projection here. And if we take a look at the base, it looks like that isn't unwrapped as far as I can tell. So you'll be able to see how that looks when we throw something on it. And then if we take a look at the plane here, you can see that it actually does have an unwrap that I did. Before I started this video. So you just have to make sure that this is unwrapped. If you don't really know what UV unwrapping is or how to do it, I do have a video, so I'll throw a card up right now so you can check out how that works and, at a very basic level. And I'll probably cover more UV unwrapping in my tutorials as we go. But I just wanted to let you know about that before you got started using these if you threw one of these materials onto something and it wasn't really looking correct. So let's go ahead and go back into the layout view here, and we're going to just go ahead and throw some materials on some things. So this plane here, let's go over here to the right, and you can see that if you go over to your material properties, there's a drop down menu here, and there's a whole bunch of different stuff you can choose from. So for this plane, let's do a glass. So I'm actually going to click this, and we'll go to glass. And remember that volumes is not supported by 2.0. So let's just choose like a clear glass, like maybe this glass antique here. And you won't see anything if you just select something from the list until you click this right here that says import material. Okay. So go ahead and click that, and you'll see that it comes up with its own name, and it has a setting, a group of settings here for your RPR Uber node and an image texture. Now, before we dive too closely, I just want to show you that in here, this is actually where all of your textures are. So if we click this little folder here, it's going to pop up this window. And my recommendation is that you'll want to save this to your favorites and maybe make a really quick little shortcut to this on your desktop, because a lot of these in here, if we change this to the tiled view so we can see this, you can actually use a lot of these images in any other render program or render engine. So you can use this in Cycles, you can use it in LuxCore, you can use it in anything else that you want to use it in. So these are not just going to work for ProRender, you can use it for anything else, which is pretty great because you get a lot of these textures that even if it's just to pre-visualize something and you want to put on really high quality ones later, it's really nice just to have them. And you can use stuff as like roughness maps, like any of these black and white values, and you can tile them seamlessly and all that kind of stuff. So they're pretty great that you can use these in anything. So what I do is I just click this little button here to add a bookmark. And if you click that, it will actually add that location to your favorites, and you can keep jumping to that section whenever. And I usually will keep a shortcut on my desktop so that I can get to this particular location very, very easily. So I'm going to hit cancel here, and I'm just going to talk briefly about some of this. So if I disconnect this, and if you take a look here, it's in the reflection roughness. If I disconnect that, and I just hit Control T here, and I just move this up. And again, I'm using the Node Wrangler add-on, so you could just go up here to Edit, Preferences, and then go to Add-ons, search for Node Wrangler, and just click that on, okay? So you can see here that I have an image texture here, and then this one says RPR image texture. Now, if you go to Control A, or sorry, Shift A here, and you go to texture, and you go to image texture, you can see that it's orange. So this is how like Cycles has it, and for some reason ProRender decided to make this one red. It really doesn't do anything different. You know, there's a couple things missing here that's not supported, like this system right here. But generally speaking, it works pretty much the same way. And you can actually take this mapping node and throw it into this UV here and keep this UV output here to that vector right there. And then if we take this and put that into the reflection roughness and hit rendered view, we should be able to see a glass texture. And there we go. So here's our glass texture. You can throw on the allow caustics, which will allow those caustics that we talked about in a previous tutorial. So if you want to know about glass, you can check that out. I'll put the link to the link in the description below. And that's going to be fine for that. So let's go over to Suzanne here. And we're going to click on this one here. And we're going to add, let's see, let's do a porcelain. So clicked on porcelain here. And then here I'm going to go to, let's do this old one right here. And then click import material. And then take a look at that. And there we go. We have a porcelain material on Suzanne here. And it looks really nice. And you can mess with these if you want, but I'm not really going to show you how to do all that in this. Those are covered in previous tutorials. But basically, this is a really quick way to visualize some materials on your objects. So let's go ahead over here onto the LuxCore ball, and let's put a metal. So let's go here, and let's go to a metal, and make that this aluminum one here. Okay, so what is this called? Let's see. Aluminum corrugated, okay? So let's import that material. And there we go. So we have a corrugated aluminum material that's been placed on the LuxCore ball. Now this base, let's go ahead and link these. So I'll select the base and then the ball and then hit Control L and link the materials. And uh-oh, something happened. So this is pretty much exactly what I was talking about before. You have an object here that does not have a UV unwrap, and then you have the object here which does. Okay, and you can take a look. If you zoom around the ball here, you can actually see how that UV unwrap works. So you can see right here, it kind of stretches down. And if we go around the ball, you can see that it's nice and even. Okay, so that's where that UV unwrap is stretching right in here. And if we go to solid view, go to UV editing, you can see that's why that stretching is there, because this grid, and if we turn this on right here, we can actually see, if I click on some of these planes here, and I go over here and hit period, you can see that that area right there is this small section right here, and that's why it looks stretched, okay? So if I go over here to the rendered view, and I turn off the overlays, You can see that stretching right there, and that's because these planes are smaller than the rest. So it's kind of stretching in a different way, which really isn't a big deal. And you can even see on the inside, if you look really closely, there's a little point in the back where everything kind of merges together. But since nobody really sees that, it's not a big deal. And there is actually another little ball that's supposed to be on the inside, but I always like remove it so you can see these types of things. But what I'm trying to get at is this. You can actually see. You can actually see the pole, the point that everything comes to right there too. So you could re-unwrap this if you want, but really, I'm not. That's not what this is about. So let's go into solid mode here, and let's go ahead and select. Turn the overlays back on. Select the base here, and I'm just going to quickly add some seams to this object. And mark that. Hit A to select all and hit unwrap. Now this is not going to be perfect. I'm just doing this really quickly just so that you guys can see what's going on here. But I unwrapped this thing onto the plane or onto our 2D plane here so we can actually see some coordinates for this object. Go back into the rendered view. And now you can see that that material is there. But you have to be careful on where you put those seams that I was marking because you can actually see where that is. And that's why I always recommend if you're trying to do this to do procedural stuff, I really wouldn't recommend it when you're using like 2D images and you're not painting it on because you're going to run into that problem. So if you want to use this and you don't want to bake out your textures before, that's fine. Just put your seams somewhere where it's not going to be seen in the render. Or make sure that you are creating your objects, painting them, and using your procedural textures and stuff inside of something like Cycles or Surface Painter or whatever it is that you're using, and then bring them into this program for your final renders. When you go really far away, it's probably not as noticeable like this right here. But if you do get closer, it is much more noticeable. So let's do one more. Let's grab the ground here, and we're actually going to jump back over to the layout view here. So if we go to layout view, and we go to the ground here, select the ground, and then instead of metals, if we go over here, and one really quick thing to note, you see where it says materials, so this is a ground material that we made before. It's going to replace that if it has a material slot already, so just keep that in mind. If you wanted to just add another one and play around with it, make sure that you hit this little plus right here to add a material slot and do it that way. But we're going to replace it anyway, and we're going to pick, let's see here, so let's do concrete. And from the list here, let's do this concrete painted right here. And we'll import that material. And you can see that has a whole bunch of other stuff. So we have some different image textures here. If we bring this out, you can see that there's image textures here, and they're all referencing that folder like before. And we even have right here, we have a normal map. And again, the same thing. The ProRender has its own sort of nodes that it uses sometimes. And you can see that the normal map is there. And then we have the image textures that are in red here. You could replace all these with the built-in cycles ones that you're used to if that helps you out. Just hit this, then hit Shift S, and you can switch the type, and then choose those different ones. But it really works just the same, so it's really not that big of a deal. So we're just going to leave it as is. So if we take a look at this here, you can see that it's really, really, really big. Okay, which maybe that works for you, but I don't think that it looks particularly good. So let's save our session here, and what we're going to do is we're going to place mapping nodes into each of these UVs super quick, okay? So I'm going to click on this image texture here, and I'm going to hit Control T. I'm going to delete the image texture, and I just use this method because it's easier. It's like much faster than adding these nodes separately. And I'm just going to pull this over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this vector and I'm going to plug it into all of these UV inputs on the right. So, or sorry, on the left of all these image nodes. Okay, so we're gonna. It's actually a lot easier if you go to the regular view here, the viewport shading and not the rendered, because it's a lot slower if you do it that way. So if we grab this, put it over here, you have Now all of your UV coordinates are piped in, which it kind of already is without it telling you. It like defaults, if this is empty, it defaults into a scale of 1 like mapping with the UV coordinate here. But what we're going to do is we're going to tile this more times. So what you could do is you could just change these values right here and put a 5 in. But we're going to put an input node right here. So if you go to input and then you go to value, you can actually pipe that right in here. And instead of us doing it individually, we can do it pretty quickly. So I'm going to put a 5 in right here. So it'll change that scaling. It would be just like if I went like this, okay? Just for you to know. So we're going to pipe that right in there and then take a look at it in the rendered view. And you can see that now it is basically tiled 5 times instead of just once. So depending on your material, that'll work. It's really up to you. And this is really just a way for me to show you all of the different ways you can use these different materials here that are built in. So, like the monkey head here, you could instead make it a, let's do like a car paint. There's actually a really cool one, I think. This metallic paint here is pretty neat. So let's do this scratched metal here. And you can just kind of like see how the developers created these materials. I do find that it's really nice to just take a look and see what they did to create some of their materials. And you can always play with these. But you can see that we have this sort of like scratchy older material here. And you can then, if you feel like that's a little bit, too stretched or something, you can always take these maps here and then just scale them up. Let's say, a tiling of 3, and you can see how that would look. So really nice way to pre-visualize some of your stuff before you do your final render, and really nice to see uh, how they created their materials so that when you're creating yours, if you get stuck or something like that, you can use this as a base or a jumping off point and then make some custom materials as you see fit. So that's pretty much going to be it for this one. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel and you check us out on all the different social media accounts. And if you would like to become a patron, you can check out the Patreon. The next tutorial is going to be on creating PBR materials with this particular engine, which should be pretty quick and fairly easy. I'm going to go into some of the more details on some of the UV unwrap issues and some of the more procedural stuff that you could do. And I will see you guys next time on DJ Tutorials.